That phone call was from Roger Avery, and Roger was an art director up at Hasbro. And the first question he asked was, "Are you the guy who sculpted the Kroll figures?" Apparently, Hasbro had purchased the Knickerbocker collection, and my masters went up to Hasbro, and Roger Avery was the art director working on the G.I. Joe line. So we talked for a little bit after I said, yes, I'm the guy who's responsible for all the portrait figures. And he said, "Do you have any engineering background?" And I said, "Yes, I've been a professional model maker and I certainly understand engineering." And he then asked me, "Would you like to sculpt G.I. Joes? Can you think of any reason why you wouldn't want to do G.I. Joes?" And I couldn't. And I said, "Sure, let's give it a try." So he said, "Well, I'm coming down to New York. Would you take a meeting with me?" And I said, "Sure, happy to." At that time, Hasbro had an office at 41 Madison Avenue, which was on the other side of Madison Square Park, and the toy center that that the whole industry used at that time was 200 Fifth Avenue on the corner of 23rd and 5th. So we met at 41, and we had a great talk, and he gave me a set of drawings and asked me how much I would charge for that. And I think, if I remember correctly, I gave him a very low price because I really didn't know any better, and I think that price was about $2,000. So that's how I began. Now, just to give you an idea of what would happen with a project, I dug around and looked through paperwork, and I would first get a freelance worksheet. See, I'm holding one right here. This one happens to be for a character that is a SWAT team member. So forgive me if I don't remember these names because sometimes they got changed. And the date on this, which I know for some of you is going to be important, is that this document was dated 1/27/1987. So this is not the first project I worked on. This is years later. The target date for the first review was February 24th, 1987, and the target completion date was March 9th, 1987. So there's a lot of little bits of information here, and it's signed by, this one is signed by Ken Ellis. So at any rate, that's what I would get to start with, a worksheet. And then what would follow would be 3 pieces of paper, and the primary sheet of paper would be this foreview. This one was illustrated by Ron Rudett, and this happens to be one of my very early figures. This is either the second or the third figure. I believe this is from Junkyard and Mutt. And there's also a dog, which was a separate drawing, but I don't have that in front of me. That would also be accompanied by a concept drawing, see? So here's a color Xerox of their conception of what that character should look like. Interestingly, for you guys, this is a G.I. Joe figure, but he originally started out as a Cobra, as a villain. So I don't know how he found religion, but he did, and he became a good guy. But he started out as a bad guy. Also, there would be a sheet like that, which would be all color information. Now, this had no application for what I had to do as a sculptor, but it was just very interesting that everything was color-coded. So you can see by these sheets that they were very thorough in what they were looking for in a work. Oh, here's another concept. I like, this is one of the rare female G.I. Joes. This is Lady J, and these concept drawings were done by different artists. This one was done by one of my favorite artists, George Woodbridge, and George's work I also knew from books on military costume and military in general, military history. So George was a very respected illustrator, and this is a really neat drawing. So I thought I'd show you that as well. Okay, now I would also receive a set of what the company called bucks. And these green pieces of cast plastic are the armatures that we had to build on. These are some extra pieces that I've had for quite a number of years. I don't have a complete set, but this, for example, is the back and the front of the torso. Here you can see the hole for the screw. And you might notice that these are larger. Now this is called two up, means that they wanted the sculptures to be twice the size that they would be as toys. And how that is accomplished, here's a leg, lower leg, and here's the thigh. These are right inside and outside of the thigh. That would fit together like that. So how this would be accomplished as a toy is that when the master was created, they could pantograph with gears on the pantograph so that they could trace the large model and gear it down by 1/2 and cut the molds that way. Here's actually a little neck piece, a ball joint for the neck, and that would give you the swivel of the head. Now with all these parts, the bucks, there are pieces for the shoulders and for the arm, and the arm also included a hand. So there are a number of pieces here, and they're all held together with steel dowel pins. But as I said, we build on top of this. Now what do we build with? Okay, well, my favorite material at that time, and is still my favorite material, is a 2-part epoxy medium, an epoxy putty called plumber seal. And this is an example. These are used tubes. You can see one is orange and the other one is blue. So these parts are put together in equal parts. And when it's fully blended, the two colors mix together and it gives you a kind of a cream color. As a matter of fact, what I'm holding right here is a plumber seal. No, that's not a space helmet, but it's a long story. The other material that gets used, I wasn't using it for G.I. Joe, but I use it now. And there's another material called Magic Sculpt, and here you can see it comes in a white container and a black container, and it comes also in different colors. This one is white, but their regular is a cream color, very similar to the plumber seal. So these materials, and there are other brands of 2-part epoxies on the market. A plumber seal was originally created to fix leaking pipes, of all things. So that's why it's called plumber seal. So if you have a leaking pipe, you can use this until you can get the plumber to the house. But you can also use this to sculpt your own G.I. Joes, as I did. Well, not for me. I was sculpting them from Hasbro. So I would advise you, if you're looking for this, Google the Red Lancers in Milton, Pennsylvania. That is a hobby shop, and they are a source. They'll have either of these. So if you want to give it a try, you're welcome to. So let me just tell you a little bit about that, and that is that the two parts are mixed together, and then they are applied to the buck, and then I would model it. And there's a variety of ways to model it, because material cures on its own by an exotherm. So when it's just mixed up, it's very, very soft. It's similar to window putty. If you've ever put in a pane of glass into a window and used that kind of putty. So it's very loose. And I've actually been able to sculpt with it with a paintbrush, a watercolor brush. And I would use, as an example, here's a bar of soap on a little palette. And I would take a paintbrush, I'll take anything here, dip it into some water, and brush it on the soap in order to create a barrier film on the hairs of the brush so that I could sculpt the fresh putty. And that could be very, very useful. As an example of how it is used is I could take one of my favorite tools, which of course is not, oh, it's right beside me, okay. Planning is everything when you're making these videos. This is my absolute favorite tool. This is called a wax modeling tool. They're made of steel. And this particular shape I had to custom make. I was able to buy a shape that was similar to this, but was still a little bit too large for the kind of detailing. So I took a grinding wheel and carve these things down and shape them to what I think is best. So when I have the putty on the legs and I need to place a crease in the putty for a fold in the cloth, I might use this tool and then come back in with a paintbrush and then carefully resculpt it so that the sense of the tool disappears, the sense of the gouge that was made with the steel tool disappears, and the softening effect of the paintbrush gives the appearance of a folded cloth. The beauty of the putty is that I could speed up the cure, and for that I used a crock pot, which is just off camera. I'm touching it right here, but you can't see it. And the crock pot would speed the cure of a part, which would mean it would harden faster and also harden more effectively under heat, so that in about 15 minutes I could take it out and I could either carve it with any number of tools, and I use a dentist hand engine, and I have these tools that are like tungsten carbide bits or diamond bits, and that's very handy for carving rock hard material. But the thing about this material is that from the very soft to the very hard, there's a lot of in between, and it is that in between that you learn how to master the more sculpting that you do, because sometimes you want to be able to sculpt material when it is firming up, especially if you want to get tighter creases, tighter detail. But the method that I've always used and still use to this day is a method of putting material on and taking it off again, and the putty does a wonderful job of laminating to itself, so that if I have a hard piece of putty, I can put a new piece right on it and blend it in, and you would never see the blending. It would just go in perfectly. That's true of the plumber's seal.